Brydon recognizes that there is anxiety about liability, and he says that the present liability regime has led to standardization of approach in order to protect against litigation. In the UK, the firms are already allowed to negotiate a limitation of liability agreement with their clients. And Brydon finds it surprising that this has not been done. He says one view is that boards might feel that they are in breach of their fiduciary duties when they recommend to shareholders to agree to any limitation of liability for the auditor. And the SEC has also set itself against the use of these agreements. So he says it might be necessary to rethink all of this. So his recommendation in this regard, the first recommendation is to free boards so that they can make the case to shareholders for the uses of a limited liability agreement, is that he recommends that the Companies Act be explicit that a board that recommends in good faith the application of such an agreement to its auditor is not in breach of its responsibilities. He then talks about liability risk. He says law firms have much bigger liability risk, and he can't understand why this liability risk, like any other liability risk, cannot be priced into the business models of the audit firms. Then turning to the factor of limiting auditors' liability, Brydon recognizes that in making these recommendations, an unintended consequence may be that the auditor liability is extended to such a point where the auditor is fearful of providing these informative services, and that was definitely not intended. He thinks that a good defense for the auditor should be that if the auditor has made his best efforts and faithfully followed those principles of corporate auditing that are in this report, then that could be a defense for the auditor. So basically saying an auditor that can show that he's done his best, he's followed the principles of corporate auditing faithfully, can use that as a defense. And that is very similar to what the Linda de Beer and Professor Mervyn King recommended, something like an auditor judgment rule in South Africa. He says that the time is right now to re-look at auditor liability, to get to a more fairer regime. And his next recommendation in this regards is that if auditors can support the conclusions in this report, then he would recommend that the regulator facilitates a dialogue between the investors on the one hand and the auditors on the other hand to structure a new liability regime that would cause fewer obstacles to a more informative audit. He then also refers to the position of the senior statutory auditor. So that's that individual that finally signs off. And he recommends or suggests, it's not quite a recommendation, suggests maybe looking at something like proportionate unlimited liability for that person while the firm still retains limited liability. But on the other hand, he also says that audit firms must be more transparent about what they are doing. Audit firms want more fees in order to compensate them for the liability that they are taking, the risk, but they are not being transparent about where those fees go, how much the audit partners get paid, and how strong the audit firm actually is. The audit firms have this privileged position that they can deliver a product that nobody else is allowed to deliver. So to give them confidence, he says it seems not unreasonable that society should have sight of the profitability of that activity and the financial strength of the firms conducting it. And he says that today's transparency reports just do not help. The transparency reports do not give the information that is necessary. So our next recommendation is that he recommends that firms that conduct statutory audits of public interest entities should publish separated financial information, including profitability of the audit practice, and that such firms should publish a remuneration policy and the annual remuneration of each relevant senior statutory auditor. And he also recommends that the audit reports should detail the number of hours spent in conducting the audit by the grade of auditor. Then he has a section dealing with the culture of audit firms. There's no recommendations here, but he says that there is still a deep-rooted culture in firms where firms confuse who the auditor's client is. The audit engagement leaders should take responsibility to ensure that there is no ambiguity and that everyone understands the CEO is not the client. The client is, in fact, the shareholders through the audit committee. He also says that firms need to make sure that they attract the best people, and therefore it might be necessary to rethink the hours worked and the pressure under which audit managers and junior auditors operate, and they should also be encouraged to speak up about any concerns without fear of any adverse personal consequences.